If I'm too loud or if I'm not too loud, you have to tell me, but I hope you all can understand me.
Your voice is beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, so my name is Hahnekamp. Actually, I live in Vienna. Originally, I come from the Burgenland. So I went for the non-locals here. The Burgenland is actually very near here, but we are not, so to speak, Silicon Valley or something like this. So opportunities for software development there is not that huge, and that's why I live in Vienna for some years. Okay, what do I do else? I'm part of Angular Architects, so we're doing training, consulting in the area of Angular, obviously, also programming, not just talking, but also doing something. And I also have my YouTube channel. Fortunately, I didn't upload so many videos lately. What I also do is Angie News. This is an Angular newsletter in the form of video. So it's released every week, just lasts 100 seconds. It's like the setting point 100. It's a copy of it. It'd be interesting. Okay, and what I'm going to talk about today is about component testing in Cypress. So this is not end-to-end testing, it's something more or less in the middle. The way how I'm going to do that is that I have prepared a use case just to make sure that we're all on the same page. I will write a normal component test as it is normally written for this use case. Then I will write a beta component test by using the testing library. So this is live coding, which complements what Lars has just shown. Then an end-to-end test. And then I hope, if you have seen how these three tests are written, what problems they are, I hope then it becomes clear why component testing in Cypress might be useful. Yeah. And before I start with that, with live coding, I think we also have to deal with some of the definitions. So the problem in testing, unfortunately, is always that we don't have clear definitions for all these terms. So regardless how many books you read, you will always see that somehow the same terms are always used, but in a different way. That's why I have to come up with my own definition of what I understand by these terms. So I would say, roughly speaking, we have 5 different testing types. There is the classic unit test, where I say I only test the TypeScript class, only the class, nothing from the HTML itself, and I mock everything, every dependency which is there. So this is the normal unit test. I'm not using a testbed folder because it's not required. There are libraries where I can mock services, and well, it's much faster if the testbed is also not included. Then comes the other testing type, which is when I say I test service or I test a component, but without a DOM interaction. I would say when you want to test, or when you apply this kind of style to a component, I don't find it very useful if I test a component only via a TypeScript class, because in the end it has a template, it has a UI, and I want to include that as well. It makes more sense for the services. But regardless, end-to-end component testing, the first two, they are not part of our game here. The more interesting part is when it comes to test beds with DOM interaction, and then here the way how I define the two terms, component and integration testing, is that I would say a component test is a test of a single component, very similar to a unit test. I include the DOM interaction, but I mock all the dependencies that this component has. It can be all the services, but it can also be, of course, the dependencies that we inherit via the templates, so parts, subcomponents, or whatever. And the integration test would not do that. So when we're talking about the integration test, I would say this is more or less a component tree, so multiple components maybe together, and also the services that they require. And the only thing that I really mock is an HTTP request, for example. And it does not go that far as Lars has shown in the last talk. It's not a test where we go over multiple routes. It's really just one component assigned to a single route. When it comes to multiple routing testing, I didn't know so much about spectaculous Sorry.
Spectacular.
Spectacular, yes, sorry, there is another testing framework with a similar name, I always mix them up. I usually, in the past, I tend to write, to use normal end-to-end testing when it comes to multiple routing or when I want to include the routings. Okay, here we have the testing pyramid because I also want to say something about the technology. This is quite a common chart, I would say, or drawing. So we usually say when it comes to unit up to integration tests, we use Karma together with Jasmine or Jest. One of these two combinations are always used. And when it comes to end-to-end testing, so tests against the full application, then most of the people these days, they're using Cypress. Protractor has been deprecated. There are other end-to-end frameworks, but in the front-end world, Cypress at the moment is the number one. And with the Cypress component test runner, so we start with the coding. The Cypress component test runner is an approach of Cypress itself. I mean, there are other frameworks that try to do the same, but Cypress wants to give us the possibility to write tests with Cypress that only deal with a component, so which only includes the test bed itself. So our Cypress tests, they don't run against an existing application, but what Cypress does, it takes a testbed configuration, it mounts it internally, and it gives us the possibility to use the Cypress commands instead of the testing library, whatever commands, to test it. This is the main goal. At the moment, it is available in a beta version, but only for Vue and for React. For Angular, we don't have an official release yet. They promised it to be by the end of the summer. But yeah, so I just took the one that we already have. For Angular, I tweaked it a little bit because it didn't work on Windows, and I'm going to share that at the moment. I mean, it's already working, so you can use it. Okay, and that's so far for the theory. Now let's come to the implementation. So I have here an existing Angular application that I use always, and it just shows some cities that you can visit, and it has here this get a brochure button, and inside of this there is this component that we want to test. It contains one input field. I can type in some kind of an address, and what this component does, it takes this input, goes to the OpenStreetMap API, and verifies if this component, if this address does exist or not. So if I open here the network tab, you will see what I mean. Where are we? What's the name of this? Schwarzgasse 1. Yeah, so you see this is the response. It says address not found. When I type in something else, like in Vienna, this one always works, Domgasse 5. That's next to the Stephansdom. We get here another message saying brochure sent. This means the address is a valid one. I've sent the brochure. Okay? So this is the way what the component does. And when it comes to the implementation, so it's called request info component. And what do we do here? Well, we have a form, obviously, and there is one, I mean, it's not complicated, but you see here that we are generating an observable, a lookup result. So this observable gets triggered every time somebody enters something into the input. And we have here a switch map where a service is used, the address lookup. That service connects to the OpenStreetMap API and returns a true or a false depending if the address is valid or not. So if I quickly open the address lookup, this is what it does. Some kind of parsing, and then we have our HTTP client with the network request. And I want to test this component, but not just this component only. I also want to do more or less an integration test in the ways I've defined it before. So this means I also want to include the address lookup, the form builder obviously, and the only thing that I will mock is the HTTP request, because I don't want that an HTTP request is sent. And I start with the normal way, with the classic way, how the Angular documentation describes it, so that we see what is required to do that. So normally what I have to do is that I say request info component spec TS, and I just have one test. It should find an address, And as we have heard last talk, we have this test bed that we need to configure first. So I say testbed configure testing module. If I'm able to type in the error, now let's import configure testing module. We have our imports. I know already what imports I need. It's only for this component because I'm using the scan pattern. This was the pattern which is more or less the one that was recommended before standalone components were brought up. I think, Lars, you are the inventor of this term.
Yes. Term, yeah.
Yes.
And some people didn't like it, but it stuck anyway.
Yes. So I just have one module that only contains the dependencies for this single component. So it's very easy for me to know what dependencies I need when I want to import something. Because I'm also using the address lookup, I also need something to mock the HTTP client. I will use the HTTP client testing module. I mean, I can also do it in a different way. And since we're using Angular material, I also need the loop animations module, otherwise it will not work. So these are the dependencies, and the next step for me would be that I just create the component itself. So I say I want to create the request info component like this, and all this stuff returns me my fixture as we know it. And the first thing that we should do, if we don't want to set up certain things before the ng-init or ng-changes runs, we say fixture detect changes. This will make sure that our forms are activated, that the form group is listening on all these input fields, and that everything is ready. And now the next thing for me, what we usually have to do inside of a test, we need to find the elements that we need to operate on. So what do I need? I need the input field, I need the button, and then for some reason I also need to get access to this message that we have here. So I need more or less 3 selectors, and again, I do it in the native, in the classic way, whether you want to define it, call it, more or less the official way of Angular. So I say, I have an input, where I say the fixture with the debug element, I query by CSS. That's the common way. I mean, everybody who has written some tests with Angular should be familiar with that. And what I use, I don't use CSS classes or that for the selection, but my components are already equipped with a data test ID. So this is a unique selection mechanism, and that's what I'm using here. So I say, I know already for the input, I have the DOM element with the data test ID address. I want to have the native element, and I say that's actually an input element. And then I need to do the same thing 2 times, because I need to have the button. And here I say it's the button search. And I also need, instead of the HTML input element, I say it's the button element. And for the message, it's a little bit different. I say here message. This comes with the lookup result. And I say it's an HTML paragraph. So these are my selectors that I need, that I have already set up. And well, the first thing that I have to do now is obviously I have to type something into the input field. And this is interesting, the way how we have to do this normally, because what I have to do is that I say input value equals the Dorngasse 5. And now I need to know certain things about the way how Angular internally works, because just by adding this value, this will not be enough. I need to dispatch a custom event so that the form group internally knows, okay, something has happened, and that internally the form group takes, the form control takes on the value. And these are things where when you miss them, you spend quite a lot of time finding a solution, finding the fix. Of course, that's not really nice. So I say here, I have a new custom event. A new custom event which has the name input. It must have the name input, otherwise it's not working. When I did that, I can click on the button. That's very easy. And now a network request starts. And this is now the time where I need to use the testing controller. So the way how it works, that I'm accessing the dependency injection, the HTTP client testing module provides me with a service which is called the testing controller. And here I can say, okay, I have just clicked on the button synchronously, a network request should have happened, and I want you to fetch this network request because the testing controller doesn't send it out, it just queues it. And I can say, okay, I expect one particular request, and I mean, I do it very fast, so it's not really bulletproof, but I say here, there should be somewhere a URL where nominatim is used, regular expression, and that's the request that I want to have. I mean, it's the only request that we have. And what I can say, I want to flush, and now of course I need to know what the original one returns. And in my application it goes like this. It returns an array, and when this array has some elements, the address is valid, otherwise it just doesn't exist. So I'm returning an array with an empty string, for example. Then I have to know something further. I have to know when asynchronity steps in, or if there is some asynchronity at all. And this is one of the not so nice things about this testing controller, because it's a synchronous observable, so I don't need to call a tick or something like this. And the danger or the risk here is obviously that now my component might behave a little bit different than the original one, because the original one might have to deal with asynchronity, which I don't have here. But let's keep it like this. And I can actually already say, well, the request has been answered, that the subscription should have received its value, so I can already say, yes, now it's the time for me to check if the message is shown. But before I do that, I need to trigger the change detection. I mean, this is something I also have to know, because if I don't do that, it won't work. And then finally, I can say message. I want to access the text content, and here I just say it should be brochure sent. And because of course I want that the test, so every test, first run of the test must always fail, because I need to know if the test is really testing what I want. I'm making a small typo. And I would expect now, when I run this, that I'm getting the right brochure sent, but with a hard T and not software. The paper, I think, okay, wonderful. Let's try it again. As you see, this is live coding, so if you see making a mistake, please interrupt me and help me, because otherwise we will be here for a very long time. Could not be found in the request info component. Did I change something? I have the solution ready, but it should be obvious. I hope this is not recorded. So of course I have to declare the component, otherwise it will not work. And we see here, yes, that's the right error message, that's the one that I was expecting. Now I can fix it, and I can say, wonderful, now we have a running test. And this is exactly the problem that we have in testing in Angular, especially so from my perspective, but also this is something that I hear all the time. This is not a real application component, so this is a very easy one. And if we look at the amount of code we have to write for such a simple test, we just have to say this is crazy, and that's also the reason why people don't want to write tests, because I have to come up with so much testing code. And of course I will not have just one test, I will have multiple tests like this, and I also have to maintain that stuff. So the normal answer now would be that I say, please write your component tests, stick to it, they are important, don't go down to the unit tests, but use something, an additional tool, like the one that Lars has already shown, like the testing library or some other. There is, for example, also Spectator, and then it should become easier. So I'm going to rewrite the same test by using the testing library, and you will see that there is really a significant reduction in terms of code size. So I say it should use the testing library. And with the testing library, as we have seen before, we always need to use the async. It's always an async function, because we have now this render function that replaces the configuration of my test bed. I mean, it doesn't replace it, it calls it internally. So the testing library is nothing on top of the test bed. It uses the test bed, so it's still important that we understand how the test bed works and all that stuff. But I can now say, okay, I want to render the request info component, and for the dependencies that I want to provide, I have here the second parameter as option. So I can more or less copy it, and this time I don't need the declaration, because it's more or less obvious if I want to render the request info component that it also needs to be declared. I don't need to do this manually, and these are just one of the tiny things where the testing library really becomes handy. So the render function should be imported from the testing library. Right. And this is already the test bed, create component stuff and everything which goes with it. And now I can do the same thing that we did before. I have here also the user event, and I can say I want to type something into an input field. So I say type. What do I want to type? Maybe I need to import it. I also need to await this, something that I always forget. And, well, I want to, first of all, I need to define the element. And for that, I can say I want to use the screen. This is something we have also seen in this code snippets before. And the screen provides me now the get by test.at method. I mean, there are lots of them, but I'm using the get method because what I want to make sure in this test that the element is already there. When I'm using the finder methods, then this means the element can still come later on, but with the get by test ID, I say it must be right there right now. And you see, I mean, there are particular methods for the test ID, so I don't need to come up with all this by CSS stuff. I can just say the test ID is that, and I want to type in Douglas as well. Like this. And then I do a click. And I say, okay, I want to click on the button. Same thing again as before. The button is search, has this test ID. And, well, of course, I also need to use the HTTP testing controller now. So I'm going just to copy it. But you see already that it's already significantly smaller. And, well, then I can say, okay, maybe some asynchronous stuff's going on. I don't know, I don't care. The only thing that I know is that sometime later an element should appear that maybe I don't want to go by the test ID, but I want to say somewhere a text should appear that contains process. And the way I can do this is that I say, I mean, I don't even need to use the expect, because if it doesn't appear, it will fail. I can say, okay, I have my screen, and I say, this time find by text, and say brochure send again with this. On purpose, I want to let the test fail. And what happens now internally is that the testing library calls also the tick, it also calls the change detection, but I don't have to care about this. If I rerun my tests, then hopefully the first one should still work, and the second one should fail, with a very nice error message. It doesn't, because it's not in the described block. Yep. And we see it. We see here already, and this is something what I always wanted to have in the past. I'm getting the output, an informative HTML output of my component, how it looked like. And if I scroll down, I can see more or less what really was there at the end. It says brochure send. I can also do it with my mouse. It also gives me this overview. There is also a playground possibility from testing library itself, where I can see the HTML rendered somewhere, but this is already very very good when it comes to debugging things. Okay, now I can just say send, and I have more or less rewritten this test with the testing library, and I think we can agree that this is a little bit smaller, significantly smaller than the former test that we had. Now, the problem is, when you show this developers, they say, yes, wonderful, but I don't have the time to learn all that stuff. I'm not specialized in testing, I need to write application code. I have already enough stress with the testing, I don't have the time to add another thing, and quite often the time is the problem. So that's why we don't have these tests, not because we don't want them, it's quite often the time. And I hear very often that people say, okay, I don't want to write this kind of tests, I just want to write end-to-end tests, just some parts of it that at least give me the guarantee that the application starts not with a white screen, and maybe some of the core functionalities are working, and that's it. And if the request info, if this really is so a critical component, then I'm going to test it via Cypress or via some other end-to-end testing tools. Because this is much better. I don't have to care about asynchrony, I don't have to care about change detection, I don't have to care about DOM interaction, which is critical. I mean, we see that the testing library, it removes a lot of this, but in the end, we still might run into some issues. And for example, if I say I have here a switch map, and it comes with a asynchronous or asynchronity, that I say, well, there is a delay of 1 second, then I know that I can do this very easily with a fake async. I say TIC1000, it just runs this method, but with fake async and async together with the testing library, you can run into issues which are very hard to debug. And then again, you're sitting for a couple of hours for a test with the testing library and you don't really know what's going on, and this is just frustrating. I mean, if you have the time to learn it, then of course it's not a problem, but not everybody of us is like Lars. So. No. It really takes a lot of skill. This is I think, a main problem of this testing, and that's why people say, look, why can't I just do that? I just have already Cypress installed. Why can I not just create a new file? And I say, okay, I know that this is not the best way about how to do it, but for me, from my time that I spend, I'm finished very early, and so I just say here we should use request info. And with Cypress, so the ones of you who don't know it, it comes with an own UI. It's very handy in terms of debugging and finding out where the errors are and all that stuff. And what I have to do, I have to type in visit, then the application pops up. I need to know, of course, at which button I have to click, because I'm now on the landing page and I want to navigate to my request info component. Yeah, but I can say, okay, I know this. I know that I want to click on a button holidays, so I want to click on an HTML element that has the test ID button holidays. And if I'm unsure if this is the right way on how to do it, then I can already try it out. So I have here already opened Cypress, and I can say, no, not component testing, but end-to-end testing. This is the additional UI that I get. So I say run Chrome. This pops up. We should have somewhere specs, but they are not there for whatever reason. Yes, I'm missing this one. No, it's there. Yeah, this is Cypress in version 10, quite new. The ones of you who have been working with older versions, you might be familiar with a different look and feel. But if I click on it, I see that my browser opens, the landing page is loaded, it clicks on holidays. I can also go back in time and all that stuff. So this is really handy. And now I can say, okay, the first steps, they were successful. I now want to click on this get a brochure. I know that this component has I know the tag name of this component. I know that this is not a button, but a link. And if I want, I can come up. So if I don't have this good test IDs, I can say, okay, there should be an app holiday card. I want to take the first one because there are many of them. Then I want to dive deeper, dive down in the componentry, and I want you, then you just click on it. And if I'm unsure, all I have to do is that I have just to switch pages. It loads, and I see, yes, I'm on the request info page, and now it's the same thing that we have seen in the component tests. So we have the test IDs. I can say, I want to use the test ID address. I want to fill in something. Doesn't work. Oh, sorry, type. I say classify. Then I say test ID button search. Click on it. And then again, I say I don't care, but sometime later, at least within 4 or 5 seconds, I think, or maybe 4, I want that a test ID appears, which contains a lookup result, and that one should contain, or should have a text, so I don't need to access the DOM element, I just say that one should have a text, and this text should be brochure sent, and this time I'm using the right one, and if this test turns green, I know it's working, which isn't. So, why is it? Oh, okay, this is a small internet connection. Brochure sent is now there, and it ran into the timeout. So I retry it again. Of course, I can. This time it worked. I mean, you can of course obviously also change the timeout in Cypress. That's not an issue. But within 5 seconds, we could expect a request. And this is what I quite often hear. People say, "Look, this. Why do I have to learn all the other stuff when I can just write my code like this?" And well, I mean, there are arguments to use the testbed, as Lars explained in detail. There are quite some arguments not to go that way. And we can test components in isolation. This is one of the big benefits. So we don't need to set up the complete application. We don't have all the amount of work that it requires to set up an application in a CI system, maybe by the database, maybe also include the backend and all that stuff. We can really just say, I want to test this component only. This is really powerful. We also have a lot of things at our disposal when it comes to precision and control. We can mock whatever we want. We can manipulate the dependency, dependency injection. We can override things. These are all things we can do because we have direct access to Angular. And of course, they are fast. The drawbacks are, of course, well, there is a large amount of code required in order to set up a test bed, especially if you are testing multiple components together. You could also, for example, use, when you say you're using NGRX, you can also mix everything together and have quite a lot of them, but this takes really some time. And of course, you need to deal with the asynchrony, change detection, and of course also the DOM interaction. You have to know some stuff, what's going on internally. This is the bad thing. On the other side, with the end-to-end tests, we have seen it's very easy to write. The developer experience is definitely superior. We also have things that I haven't shown you. So for example, we can also have a video recording, we have screenshots. If something fails, everything's there. So really powerful. But the drawback is the infrastructure setup. In order to set up everything, you need to have an existing application running, and they are slow. Especially if you're doing multiple things where the route changes, when you need to reload the page all the time. They are really slow, and in the end, that's the issue, because if you have to wait an hour or 2 hours for a CI, then of course that's not a problem. Yeah, and that's not the end. This is more or less the start, because this is where the component test runner comes in. Because the component test runner says, I want to combine these things together. I give you the possibility to use the test bed, set up everything. So this is the drawback that you still have. You still have to set up the test bed. You have to configure the testing module. Speed, yes, it's kind of an open question. I mean, it's not that slow because we're not running a full application. We are operating against the web server that has a static page that just uses the test bed. But we get all the other benefits from the component tests and from the end testing. So we can test our components in isolation. We have the precision, and of course we don't have to deal with the asynchrony and all that stuff. And the way how it works is actually everything's already set up. So with Cypress 10, there is this component testing, and everything that you have to do, that you need to enable it, and that goes via support component. There is this file. You have to say, okay, well, this is what I want to use. So it's more or less that one. And well, then you can already start. So that was the wrong file. Here it is. You can say you want to use a dev server. These are the file names you want that Cypress looks out for. In this case, I say everything in my app folder with Cyts should be considered as a component test, and then I can already start. So I can now go to my request info component again. Not to that one, to the other. And I can say, okay, in the same file, I want to have another one, same folder. I call that request component Cyts. Well, I write the test. It should test the request info component. As I said, we need to come up with the testbed configuration, and that usually looks like this. We have a config. This is of type testbed config, and is of type request info component. This is the one that we want. And I need to provide now the dependencies, as we did before. It's more or less I can copy and paste it. So again, the imports. I say, okay, this is the one that comes into the testbed. And then I have a command. I can say mount. I say I want to mount the request info component, and I use that configuration that I have already generated. And now I can already try that. Now I can go to my Cypress. I can say component testing before it's working. Yep. Start component testing in Cypress. Browser goes up. It says, yeah, I found that one. I can click on it. Comes a strange message at the beginning, but that's not a problem, because somewhere it should be shown, yeah. That's the wrong one. Come on. Oh, okay. Just have to move with the mouse out of the side menu. It shows already something. Of course, the layout is missing, the CSS style is not there, but it is the component. And now I really can say, okay, as I did before in Cypress, but now with the test bed, that I just say, I use these three commands, like this. I can also say I don't want to use the testing module of the HTTP client, I want to use the real one, because I don't want, because I want that a real HTTP request is sent out here, and that's it more. If I go back, we see the test is already through. I can make it a little bit larger. Yeah. Again, layout is an issue here, but it says process end. And of course, I can also now use everything from Cypress that Cypress provides me. All the commands are available. For example, I can also say I want to intercept the network. So I can say, okay, regardless of what you type in, I will intercept this request, and I will tell you that no address that you enter is a valid one. Okay, just Cypress intercept. I want to intercept everything that goes to nominatim, and then I want to return the response, a body that contains an empty array. As I said before, this is the sign that the search or that the address is an invalid one. And well, if I go back, the test will fail because it says clearly here address not found. This feature is still in an experimental version, so I mean, as you see, there are some things that still would have to happen before it goes live, especially when it comes to the CSS. It is possible, and I have a solution. I created more or less a wrapper component. This wrapper component contains style CSS and has view encapsulation set to none, and I have all my styling in this component as well. But this isn't at the moment. Good. What else do I have? Coding time is already over. summary, from my perspective, I mean, end-to-end components and end-to-end writing tests end-to-end, I think we can all agree on that they are easy to write. The problem is not the implementation, the problem is always the time. But with component testing, we are using the test bed, we don't need the application. And from my side, this has really the potential, I mean, we have to see it's still in a very early phase, that we really, in the future, might be tests not with Jest, with Karma anymore, but just use the Cypress tools and still write our component tests. I also think that Lars framework might be able to adapt it to Cypress as well. In the end, when you say you're relying on the test bed, theoretically it should be possible. And, well, performance penalties are still unclear. I mean, I think it will be slower, but definitely not that slow when you say you compare an end-to-end test, which runs against the complete application with a normal test bed one. And yeah, I mean, Jest Karma will still be there, but we still have to write unit tests. So the one where we don't have DOM interaction, that's still required. And yeah, I mean, that's it at the moment. So as I said, this is very new. Wait a second, this is very new. I don't really know, but of course I would also be interested in hearing your opinions. If you see some things where you say, but I don't think that this end-to-end component tests can handle this and that use case, and this is up for discussion now. Thank you.